Next area is computer modeling and simulation. And in our governance construct, we have steering committees with board champions. And Randy Schistel, who is the Global Vice President of Technology at Boston Scientific, and Boston Scientific has been one of the founding companies of MDIC in the early days, and Randy's been on the board since the beginning, is going to come up and start the computational modeling and simulation section. Randy?
Okay, thank you, Bill. I'm going to do a brief introduction, and then Kyle and Don will participate here, and hopefully we'll have some time for Q&A at the end. See how quickly we can move through the slide deck. Here is our vision, priority, and goals. You can see the statement here. Those of you that have attended in the past have seen this before. We're really building a community. We're building that community of computational modeling and simulation stakeholders to include folks from government, industry, academia, and other. And it's really making a difference. We're historically a very siloed organization or structure in the community, and we're breaking that down. We're looking for ways to work together, share data, share models, share a good conversation. You can see our goals here: advancing the state of the state, using computational modeling to really drive stronger quality, better speed, better efficiency in our product approvals. So our community of practice, again, that's a really big thrust for us, and thank you for attending, those that are present here in person and those that are on the phone. We have a good community growing, and we've got good engagement. People are really interested in learning more about the field. As everyone is constrained on resources, we're looking for more and more engagement, but we're seeing that real strong interest in learning more about the field and finding areas where people can engage. And the partnership between government and the industry in this field is fantastic, and you'll see that as part of the presentation. Our steering committee here is shown. You can see the three large blocks: the med device manufacturers, the FDA, nonprofits, and other stakeholders. I won't go through the names one by one, but you can see we've got a broad and active community at the steering committee level, representation from many companies and many parts of our government structure. So with that, I will introduce Kyle. Kyle is our PI in the FDA organization and really a strong partner and strong spokesperson for what we bring to the community as part of MDIC. And this is the second of the 5 projects you'll hear about today, and you'll see a really broad scope in what we're doing and where we're engaging. Kyle?
Thank you, Randy. Good morning. As Randy said, and as you've heard this morning, one of our goals at MDIC is to break down silos and build community. And modeling is one of the areas that is most ripe for this. I bring this slide to your attention. Many of you in the modeling space know that we put out a guidance in draft form some time ago because we wanted industry to have a shared understanding of what we wanted to see as we looked at computational modeling as a form of evidence. And I just said something about siloing because this is a really important slide that kind of is an example of that. Not only are there silos in terms of companies doing modeling internally, and FDA might see that, but other companies don't know, what models we're seeing and what evidence would be important to us. But there are also silos in terms of the different application areas in which modeling is important. And the MDIC project allows for these stakeholders across different areas of modeling application to talk about the common challenges that we have around validation and verification of models. And so this is something FDA cares deeply about and sees as having tremendous advantages for changing the regulatory evidence balance from clinical trials to predictive models. So, alluding to that, we use modeling in medical device regulatory submissions. We see that you all are using it in your development areas. You're using it as a design optimization tool, and we want to move modeling into a different area, which is in terms of how you might evaluate performance. This is an example in graphical form of what I've just said. There are many areas in which we all understand this industry, like other industries, is making tremendous use of sophisticated models. Our goal here is to make changes in terms of modeling being used not just for prototyping, not just for design optimization, but truly in answering those questions that are in the regulatory decision-making process around how well does it work, how safe is it. So our vision is that the computational modeling and simulation project would support a change in the paradigm so that patients get access to new technologies that are safe, effective, and of high quality, enabled by computational modeling tools and simulation methods as evidence of safety and performance. So you've heard some questions this morning about how do we decide what we're working on and how do we set priorities. And so I bring this slide to you especially for those of you that aren't part of our projects yet or perhaps not even MDIC members, to understand that MDIC membership gives you a real place at the table for determining what we work on. We can't do everything. That's already been said. We don't have the resources, and the field is very broad. But this slide shows you that it's been almost 2 years now that the modeling project was staffed by Dawn Bardot as our PI at MDIC, and I was brought on board, and Randy was as well. And we stood up a steering committee that Randy showed you has broad membership from our nonprofits and government, our regulatory internal members from across offices at CDRH as well as with industry. And we engaged in a number of different efforts to gather information in terms of where the reviewers within CDRH, where the researchers within CDRH, and then where our industry partners thought we had the possibility of working together to make a real difference. And so you'll see here, when it says here meeting on mock submission, that means we asked questions internally of what kinds of mock submissions and what is that? That means we would envision a mock device with a modeling component as its regulatory evidence and bring that to FDA. What would be the application areas and where would you use modeling? And how might we work together demonstrating where modeling would play a role in terms of being a significant part of the data, put that information out as published and consumable information to make a difference community-wide. And so then we engaged in discussions at conferences like the Regulatory Science Symposium at the Design of Medical Devices meeting in April 2014. We pulled together face-to-face executives and fellows from industry industry members interested in modeling and simulation with our key experts within CDRH to sit down at a number of application-specific breakout sessions and say, really, what can we do together? And we scoped out a set of projects. So this gives an example of the kind of data. There's much more data that we got from our survey of our industry partners saying, where are you using modeling today? And what are some of the barriers to increasing its use? And you'll see that the biggie here, if you look at the bar chart at the bottom, is the uncertainty around regulatory expectations. And so that is exactly where there's space for MDIC to bring collaborators together to drive down that regulatory uncertainty and drive up the use of modeling in regulatory submissions. So I said we had some breakout sessions together at our face-to-face meetings with our executives and fellows at this within a safe environment for talking with FDA experts. And from that came a set of working groups where people chose to continue to work together. And you see, I'm not going to go into exactly what we're working on, but I just wanted to give you a sense of our organization and governance structure. You'll see that our application areas in which we've got project teams working together across a number of different areas, including orthopedics, cardiovascular, blood damage, clinical trials, and Dawn will tell you more about what they're working on. I'm just trying to give you an idea of where these projects came from in terms of shared interest, shared vision for what we could do together. Projects are required to set up statements of work, bring those to our steering committee, and then they're able to move forward and engage more completely. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Don Bardot from MDIC, who will tell you a little more about the progress we've made and our vision for where we go next. Thank you, Kyle. So Kyle took us through the planning, the scoping, and the initial staffing of our project team for computational modeling and simulation. And I'm going to take you into the last year's effort of execution. This is a slide I like to use as an overview of both that execution and governance. In the upper right-hand corner, you're going to see what look like clock dials that demonstrate the stages that work streams and our working groups go through. They start out by scoping the work that they're going to do. They bring that to the steering committee for review. That work stream then, based upon the review at the steering committee level, is initiated. And then we track the progress of that work stream, noting when it's approximately halfway through and then when we've completed it. And if we think about all the work that these working groups are conducting, we like to place it over top of our total product life cycle. That gives us a way to look at where the working group is conducting their activities and where they're looking to make impact with their computational modeling and simulation efforts. Then additionally on this chart, the vertical axis shows the type of tool or method, the type of deliverable that the working group will produce. And if I start to walk you through those, we have an infrastructure activity, which is our library of models and simulation. It's where MDIC has invested seed money in building a prototype for a database that would be publicly shareable to access models and data that the MDIC community and the community at large create and share, helping to break down those silos so that we're able to all access the same information, build the same foundation that we can then innovate competitively on top of individually. So the foundation of shared information provides us a launch point for better future innovations, because we all understand the fundamental science and we're all sharing those fundamental models and data. If we take a step down, we see we also have the MR and RF-induced heating and the blood damage working group looking to create tools. In each of these instances, what's being identified is the major gaps in the use of computer modeling and simulation isn't the next best model, but rather it's data, high-quality data that's used either to validate the model or as an input to the model. And what we found is that many of our working groups are focused on that. We have a neurostimulation working group that is looking at mechanisms of damage associated with neurostimulation so that we can expand how we stimulate into parameter spaces that have historically been off limits because we didn't have ways to parameterize how to operate in those areas safely. We have a combining bench and simulation to inform clinical trials working group that's really envisioning transforming clinical trials by rebalancing the evidence to include modeling and simulation, which we are calling virtual patients, as part of the paradigm in clinical trials. So when we have highly predictive engineering models that can be validated and shown as credible for our context of use, we can then call that a virtual patient. And when we conduct a clinical trial with real patients, and we have virtual patients as part of that clinical trial, we can use those virtual patients to help create the power of the clinical trial. We've also worked on a pilot where we brought in an expert panel of modeling and validation people that are independent experts in the world to review models for their conformance to validation standards. We've completed that activity. It was very well received, and we're looking into methods to continue to do that on an ongoing basis. We have two working groups that are in the work stream scoping phase, the orthopedic working group and the heart and vasculature working group. And then these teams are looking more in the process and demonstration project realm of types of tools and deliverables that they're producing. So you can imagine a demonstration of how you conduct a virtual experiment with a virtual patient and a virtual device. I'm going to quickly flash through slides that give us more detail about the working groups, but to get to questions, we'll just do a couple of high-level comments on each one of these. So this is a combining bench and simulation to inform clinical trials working group, the virtual patient working group.
They're conducting a mock submission, as Kyle explained, and that mock submission is demonstrating a statistical framework that they've created for incorporating these virtual patients in a Bayesian-designed clinical trial, where the virtual patients serve as a Bayesian prior in that clinical trial design. The mock submission's a third way through, and they have a manuscript on that statistical framework that's being submitted for journal publication this month. Heart and Vasculature Working Group is in the workstream scoping phase, and this is an example of what they're identifying as their work. The Orthopedic Working Group, also in the workstream scoping phase, is having a face-to-face meeting to really met out the details of what they want to work on, and that'll occur this October. The MR-Induced Heating Working Group is working on their first work stream. They've identified it and now are putting that down on paper to bring it to the steering committee for review. And the Blood Damage Working Group just completed writing of their work stream. The steering committee of the Modeling and Simulation Project, which serves as the governance for our project, looked over that statement of work and reviewed it, and now the working group is developing their project plan to identify the volunteer resources and other resources that will be necessary to conduct that work. And the Neurostimulation Project is probably our most interesting in how they've conducted some of their resources. While the working group is staffed with all volunteers, they've also raised restricted donations to fund a MDIC collaborator in residence that is placed at FDA conducting the research, the experiments associated with this work. And then finally, I'll close with talking about the Library of Models and the infrastructure that we've built for it. We have a vision of this digital library where computer modeling and simulation tools are available, the models and data. But different than some of the other libraries that exist out there, this library is exclusively focused on high-quality models and data that are regulatory grade and trustworthy. And that's a point of differentiation. MDIC provided seed fundings, and we built an initial prototypes. We had a Phase 0 prototype and now a Phase 1 prototype. That Phase 1 prototype is being piloted as a place for one of these working groups to work on creating their deliverables that will then be publicly delivered. And based upon our ability to build a sustainable plan, we'll publicly release a version of this library in our Phase 2 of this activity. Now, this is a roadmap that those of you who attended the annual meeting last year would have seen. This is a computational modeling and simulation roadmap that we built by engaging those stakeholders that Kyle identified. We thought that in the first year, when we executed our plan, that we would focus on replacing benchtop experiments with models and simulations. That would be our easy, low-hanging fruit to engage on. And then 10 years from now, we'd be able to come back and talk about virtual patients, because that was really the holy grail, what we wanted to accomplish as an endpoint. But what we found out is we're able to talk about virtual patients 1 year later. We've had high success and great progress, and part of that is because the area of virtual patients and how you envision implementing that is complete white space. No one else is working in that space, and we're able to bring our volunteer resources together to envision how to create virtual patients, what does it mean, how to demonstrate that they're credible, and how to incorporate them into our clinical trials. We are continuing to work on the early low-hanging fruit as well, but those might end up taking a little bit longer. So this is really a great success story. When we set out this roadmap, we're already beginning where we thought we would end. So with that, I'll invite Randy back up to say our closing remarks and hopefully have a few minutes for Q&A.
Thank you very much, Kyle and Don. So it's a vibrant community, and we're engaging more and more every day. It's exciting to be part of. This series shown on the slide in front of you is the MDICx Series. Hopefully you've engaged in this already. Look to the MDIC website for the times and pattern for these conversations. You can see there are a series of telecons that have already occurred, and the two upcoming telecons, the Library Infrastructure Project and the Virtual Patient Mock Submission Update. So Don, in addition to helping us on the Computation Modeling and Simulation Project, really runs this series of conversations through MDIC. So be part of this. This is a good way to stay current with all of the activity, not only in computation modeling and simulation, but in the other projects as well as they're presented through this forum. We'll open up the floor for a few questions. Do we have time, Bill?
Yep.
Okay. Yes. Okay, question, I'll just repeat it for the modeling library. Who creates and contributes, and what is the incentive for doing that? Don, you're best to answer.
Question. There's a couple of reasons that you would want to. There's multiple companies out there who will openly say, well, I have an instance of 10 pieces of data, and gosh, I'd like to have 20 more. And so the incentive is, well, perhaps if you're willing to put your 10 into the library, others will give 20 more. So it's an opportunity to be greater as the sum of our parts than we are individually. So that's really the underlying value proposition. But it's going to be finding those people who go first. But then additionally, the library can serve as a place for what are called medical device development tools that FDA is piloting right now. And these are tools that are designed to be, for example, models that produce evidence and that by having them qualified in advance as medical device development tools, it reduces the regulatory burden and increases the ability to have those tools be used in a submission. All of these tools then need to be publicly available. They can be licensed models and others, but there has to be a way for the public to know about them. This library is a great way to either place the model in that library for free use or place information about that model in the library with directions on how you can get more information and access.
Very thorough. Thank you. Next question.
So this question is related to the work that's going on in this group, but maybe it's more general too. And the question is about how the research activities going on in the FDA's Office of Science and Engineering labs fits into the context of the overall regulatory science priorities that were laid out before. Is the idea that those priorities will drive the direction of much of the, or some of the research that goes on in the labs? Because you can see the overlap here very nicely between many of these projects. And I'm just curious to know how, from a structural point of view, that's going to be incorporated.
Sure. So to be clear, those are draft priorities, and you are all writing them down, but they're in dark pencil, not pen yet. But they definitely are meant to drive the research both internally and what we are looking for partners to help with, because those are priorities that were identified from many stakeholders, both within FDA as well as more widely, as Annie said, from industry. What Annie also said and Jeff said, and I will continue to say, is that we are resource-strapped, as you all are, and we all appreciate that the best way to make progress is to each work together, and we see MDIC as our primary place for collaboration. Annie talked a little bit about ways that we set up partnerships with academia and industry, but I have to add to that one of the beauties of working with us with MDIC is the partnership agreements are already in place. So becoming a member of MDIC just completely streamlines your ability to collaborate with us. And so yes, yes, and yes.
This is so interesting. The computational models generate safety and performance. What about outcomes?
So the short answer is yes. The long answer is that each model is typically very different and context of use dependent. And then it is designed and then validated for whatever outcome measure it's intended to predict. And if those are clinical trial outcomes and there are methods for engineering tools to predict those outcomes, then there can be and are, in some instances, outcome predicting computational models.
I was wondering, for these newly developed models, who will be responsible for judging that they're validated enough for reviewers to use them?
Sure. So it's a multi-pronged question. There's a big difference between a research tool, a research model, and a model that is then regulatory grade and predictive of safety and efficacy information. Ultimately, all of the regulatory decisions live in the FDA, and it's their place to make all of those determinations. But what we do at MDIC is talk about what are the features of models that make them credible. What are ways that we can assess credibility? And then in the instance of the pilot, we brought in experts who then were able to assess the extent to which models and the associated validation work adhered to existing standards for verification and validation.
You can see, go ahead, Kyle.
I wanted to add to that one of the values of the Clinical Trials Informed by Simulation project is that we're talking about a mock submission from a cross-industry MDIC working group. That submission will come to FDA, and we have a firewall between the MDIC team that is bringing the submission to the agency, and it's really cool that that team includes some folks from FDA on the pre-submission side, and then separately there will be a review team that will be reviewing this mock submission. All of the submission components as well as review memos and feedback to that team will be made public. So when you ask about, how you will know what we expect, that's an example where the community will benefit because we'll be transparent about whether or not we thought what came to us in the form of this mock submission using modeling was sufficient and where we thought there were some deficiencies. So we all see where we need to move.
And you can see the tiered nature of the library on the screen, and that top of the pyramid, is where those regulatory grade models and tools would be housed in a public way.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Maybe one more question? Okay, so to borrow a phrase from a former Hewlett-Packard CEO who was talking about productivity, if the computational modeling and simulation community only knew what the computational modeling and simulation community already knows, we could make transformational change in the quality, the speed, and the efficiency of product development. Thank you.
Thank you.